Good morning, and welcome to the city of Wilmington, Delaware. I'd like to thank you all for coming out today for our fraud panel discussion. I would like to introduce our Honorable Mayor Michael Przewski, if he would like to come and give us a brief word.
Thank you, Terrence. I'm delighted to be with you today. I thank all of our guests for showing up here. It's our honor to have you here. You bring an expertise to this discussion that I think is sorely needed. We're entering a time that's the brave new world for people like me, and there's places that we can misstep day in and day out that we're just not aware of. And I think having an event like this where you're going to sit and highlight all those places where we're vulnerable is really important to all of us. So I really appreciate all of you being here. Mr. Auditor, we are delighted with the job you're doing, and I'm so glad that you've decided to sponsor an event like this. It's going to be a big help to all of us. So we hope we have a productive afternoon, and thanks once again for being here.
Thank you, Mayor, for the kind words. Before we get started, I would love for my audit team to stand up so I can acknowledge them, because without them, there would be no me putting this panel discussion on. I may be the figurehead, but they actually do all the heavy lifting behind the scenes. My audit manager, Tamara Thompson, she actually is the person who laid the groundwork for us last year, where she pretty much did the research and put together the International Fraud Awareness Week for the city. This year, Yvette Johnson, she's our senior auditor, along with the other two people standing beside her. They all helped put this together. Michael Malandando, as well as Tony Cleaver. Thank you all. I really appreciate your help, as well as Rebecca Cruz. She's outside. She's our admin assistant. She also did a wonderful job for us as well. And in addition to that, our external auditors, Belfint, Lyons, and Schumann, did an awesome job. Specifically, George Veneris, we appreciate you for bringing to our attention that you would be willing to have your company be our corporate sponsor. We really appreciate your help and everything that you do. Thank you. Now, today is a very important day, because fraud is something that affects all of us. It is something that is constantly evolving. In a world where the only thing constant is change, we must be aware that fraud, again, is evolving daily. For us to try to limit the reach of the perpetrators of fraud, collaboration with others is the key to our survival. That is why we are here today, so that we can talk, listen to the wonderful panelists who decided to join us today, from our newly elected Delaware auditor, Kathleen McGinnis. We have Mike Mass from Belfint, Lyons, and Schumann. He's the manager on our engagement. And we also have Alan Rajko from the Department of Justice. He's the Chief Special Investigator for Consumer Protection. Thank you all for joining us. Now, fraud, according to the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, 2016 report to the nation, every year, $3.7 trillion is lost to fraud. $3.7 trillion. That number is amazing. It is ridiculous for us to lose that kind of money on an annual basis. To put it in perspective, the three wealthiest people in the world, if you combine their income and multiply it by 16 times, you still will not reach $3.7 trillion. You will come close, but you will not reach $3.7 trillion. Another instance, you can stack nickels from here to the moon 375 times That's the magnitude of $3.7 trillion. It's massive. So today is not about me talking. It's really about us collaborating and listening to the wonderful panelists that we have together to talk for 10 to 15 minutes about their experiences in dealing with fraud. And hopefully we can all walk away learning a few things that can be beneficial to us going forward, because dealing with fraud is not something that one person, one group can do alone. It requires all of us collectively together to do our part, because fraud, again, is constantly changing. So with that said, I would love for Kathleen to take the mic.
Okay. Would you like to ask me a question? Do you want me to talk a little bit about, my bio, my background? How would you?
Oh, Kathleen, she went to Florida Tech, where she earned a BS in biology, and then Northeastern University to earn her pharmacy degree. She is also a graduate of the FBI Citizens Academy of Baltimore, a former investigator, a certified fraud examiner. For nearly 2 decades, Kathy has served as an elected Rehoboth Beach City Commissioner. During her tenure, she pushed for the state to help fund a multi-million-dollar street cap aesthetics and infrastructure upgrade, as well as garner nearly $80 million in public and private investments in the city. Recently, Kathy oversaw the new City Hall construction project, which saved taxpayers thousands of dollars. She has consistently fought waste, fraud, and abuse while on the city commission. Using her position as city commissioner, Kathy continuously advocates for efficiency, transparency, and good government. So Kathy, would like to find out from you, what are the 3 biggest indicators of employee fraud?
Is this on? Okay. First off, thank you for having me, and I'm sure there's many people more well-versed out there in the audience now that I see and have met a few people coming in. I can tell you from an employee's perspective, I've had 2 businesses and small businesses and managed hundreds of people over the course of 16 years. And one of the big indicators was living beyond their means. When somebody's a clerk in a small store, maybe making $11 an hour, single mom, the kids, the stress is all that's going on, and all of a sudden they, have money for a brand new beautiful car, and they're putting in a pool in their backyard. You're thinking, There's also, never wanting to take vacation or refusing assistance from somebody. They don't want anyone else to perform their work or do their work or see their work, and then usually a disgruntled or entitled attitude. So those are kind of the things that I've seen pop up that raise to the top. I'm sure other people might have other experiences depending on if you've worked with someone and experienced it, or you've actually were managing it and seeing it underneath you.
Okay, thank you. Would any of our other panelists like to discuss any of the indicators they are aware of surrounding employee fraud?
No, that's it. As she was talking about employee fraud, in my past life, in my prior job with the Dover Police Department, and as a detective, you do start to find internal thefts. Then you try to find the reasons why. Besides, living beyond your means, gambling is another big issue that we've had, especially in the Dover area, with managers and taking money because they have problems with that, and also drugs. We have that out there too. Living beyond their means. We just had a case where someone who worked in a profession, she was taking money to live up to the standards of her husband, and to the tune of well over $100,000, probably over $300,000 worth from a company in Sussex County. So there are a lot of indicators out there that you really have to watch out for, and it can happen across the board.
Yes. Kathy, I have another question for you.
Okay.
What measures can an organization put in place to identify and mitigate conflicts of interest?
Well, I mean, you can have a tip line, a hotline, or a venue for people to be able to report things that they're seeing. Sometimes it's, usually they want to be anonymous about it. In the workplace, if you can compare your vendors' purchase orders against your employees, there's been employees that have purchased items and they never showed up at work, but they ended up at their residence instead. That's always exciting. But you can also require like an annual disclosure. So there's tons of things you can do. You can also be on the front end if you want to be proactive about it. And there's a lot of opportunities that I think what's unfortunately the person here who was going to speak in the IT realm, that's really key. That's a lot of opportunity to get hit with fraud, not just in a business capacity or a work capacity, but on your cell phone, with smishing with text. So unfortunately, a lot of things are happening with technology, and it's making it easier to put into some internal controls, but also it's an issue because of the change so fast with the software and the technology.
Yes, I
That
agree.
makes sense.
I agree. Things are definitely changing at warp speed for us from a technology perspective. Having our cell phones, we actually have little computers with us 24/7, and it's easy for that device to be compromised. And we have to definitely make sure that we're doing the things to protect our information, like changing our passwords on a regular basis, making sure that people are not just leaving our devices alone for other folks to have access to it, making sure that we have our screensavers set so that it comes on a pretty frequent basis so that other people won't be able to access our devices as well.
And the one thing to add is the two-step verification, not only from your cell phone, but and there's so many different walls and barriers that different agencies and companies can put up, even interacting with their clients as well.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'd like to move on and get Mike Mass to join us. Mike actually started working at Belfont Lyons and Schumann immediately upon graduating from the University of Delaware, and he quickly passed all parts of the CPA exam. As a manager of the auditing department's governmental niche, Michael's strength is his command of technology and strategic use of data extraction software to isolate errors and recognize internal controls deficiencies. He utilizes his strong analytical skills and attention to detail to focus on the specialty practice areas of internal control and forensic accounting. Thank you, Michael, for joining us. I'd like to find out from you, Mike, how can we combat fraud in government?
So first of all, thank you. I'm honored to have been asked to sit on the panel, and I'm glad to be here to share a little bit about fraud with you today. One of the most important factors to combat fraud in an organization is strong internal controls. Internal controls a lot of times seem like they slow down the process of doing business on a day-to-day basis because you're going to include multiple people in every transaction. But it's really very important to ensure that everyone is transparent within an organization about the transactions that are being conducted and that they're being conducted in an efficient and accurate way. One of the important factors to consider when we have an organization's internal controls is trust. In a healthy organization, we build relationships with each other, and it leads us to at times maybe lower the level of scrutiny we give to information that our coworkers provide us. This can actually allow an individual that's unscrupulous to commit fraud because we've now lowered the level of documentation that may be required for a disbursement or for a transaction that may be fraudulent. So it's really important to enforce internal controls, to build strong internal controls within an organization and to continue to enforce the controls even as we do build trust with those that we work with.
Thank you, Mike. Trust is very important, and that's something where we want to make sure also that we realize the people who perpetrate the frauds don't always look like the image we think the perpetrators look like. If you look to the person to your right and to your left, not saying that they are committing fraud, but these are the type of people who actually do commit fraud. People who look like us, people who are educated, people who you would least expect are the people who commit these type of frauds. So we have to be aware of that and not let our guard down and give too much control to people because we trust them. We want to make sure that we're doing background checks on these people. And I know a lot of companies, they do the background checks during new employee hiring. But that may be something where we may need to think about doing it more frequently, just to make sure that as fraud is constantly changing, people and their lifestyles are constantly changing, and we want to be aware of some of those changes. Mike, what would surprise our audience the most about fraudsters?
So it's interesting, you actually just hit on it, that a fraudster can be anyone. As I was actually preparing for this panel, I casually asked my wife, who do you think a fraudster is? And she responded with Bernie Madoff, who, for those who aren't familiar, committed the largest Ponzi scheme. I believe it was $65 billion ever. So he's not your average fraudster. He's the outlier. As Terrence mentioned, a fraudster can be anyone. It's your, as Kathleen mentioned, your accounts payable clerk. I read an article about a accounts payable clerk who had her car repoed on the first day of employment and then went on to drive Audis and take luxurious vacations. And it was all on the back of her employer who she was embezzling from. So it's important to realize that anybody with a level of trust and access can rationalize themselves into committing fraud within an organization.
Thank you. Thank you. Alan? Alan serves as the Chief Special Investigator of the Consumer Protection Unit for the Delaware Attorney General's Office. He has over 5 years' experience in this unit. In this position, he's investigated various fraud complaints against local and out-of-state businesses, internet companies, internet scammers, and oversees the Identity Theft Passport Program. He is a retired lieutenant from the Dover Police Department, where he worked for 26 plus years. He served in the Patrol Unit, Criminal Investigations Unit, and commanded the Special Enforcement Unit. He holds a bachelor's degree of science in criminal justice from Wilmington University and an associate degree in criminal justice from Delaware Technical Community College. Thank you for joining us, Alan.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here, Terrence. I'm going to go over a lot of what is going on now and some of the scams that are local to our area that we've been seeing recently. But I'm going to talk about them, but here's one that I just saw on the news. The GoFundMe couple that were supposedly helped by a homeless person. They were all just indicted for that, as they came together and formed this scam and got over $400,000 out of people. So yes, it comes back to who is the scammer, who's the fraudster? You don't know who they are. They can be anybody. They're not just a bad guy that you have your impression of, and that's where you need to change that, is these fraudsters are going to be nice to you. They're going to act like they're your friends. They're going to gain your trust. They're going to gain your confidence. Confidence is the word for con man. So that's what you really have to look out for. It's, it's not to be fearful of everyone, but you really have to just change the mindset of what you think a bad guy / fraudster is. What I've seen here recently is the vacation rental scams that we have, especially down at the beach. They're on Craigslist. They give a great price. What they do, they they will collect information off a legitimate site. They'll make their own on Craigslist. People will wire them money, and then they get to the house and they're like, "Who are you?" That happens quite a bit down in our beach area. You have a home for rent. It's the same thing. You'll have a home that is closed up, that is for sale. Someone will come in and change the locks. They'll rent it out on Craigslist. You'll pay a security deposit. You pay a month or two rent, and they're gone. And all of a sudden, someone comes there, and you're in that house. You also have the work-at-home scams, and where you're going to transfer and wire money. And then we get into the lottery scams. They're all over. With the Publishers Clearinghouse, they will mail. They're usually mailers, and they're also online. We have one that was just brought into me, and it looks fairly good. But if you read it, you'll see a lot of grammatical errors on this. And you know, if you didn't sign up for it, you shouldn't be winning this. You're not going to luck into it that way. You have a relative that was arrested out of state. We get calls on that. You have a relative that's out of the country, lost all their ID, lost all their money, and there's a warrant for your arrest. I've received calls for that as well, and I still have them, and I'm still waiting for that person to come forward with that one. So ways to avoid things like that: use a reputable dealer or realtor if you're going to be renting property. You know, get on the internet and search that too. Look up that place. Make sure that everything's legitimate. Don't accept checks from people that you don't know. They're not going to mail you a check and say, deposit this $2,000 check, keep $500 for yourself, and then wire the rest. Well, you're going to do that in a day or two, and it takes at least 7 days for a check to clear. The bank will put it in there, make it accessible to you, but when it comes back and bounces, it's coming out of your account and the money's gone. So if you have a check you receive from someone, ask the teller, ask the manager, how long is this going to take to clear to where I know the money's in account, and then wait and send the money. And if that's through a fraudster, you're going to start getting a lot of calls because they know that once you find out it's bad, they're not going to send you that money. And you can't win the lottery unless you played the lottery. A lot of these scams online will say you were on a certain search engine and we picked you from that. You get all these European lotteries that some of them aren't existent and some are, but they're all in different formats. And again, they take this information and they put it on their own site. They try to make it look very appealing and alluring to you. And then they're going to want a service fee. Well, once they get that one service fee, they're going to ask for more money, and people will do that. We have cases that people have given hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they still think that Publishers Clearinghouse is coming through their door one day to pay it all off, and it's not going to happen, even when we keep telling them it's not going to happen. And your family member, if someone calls you and says they're arrested, they lost all their ID, say, oh yeah, okay, what agency? You'll call that agency back. You won't just all of a sudden wire money, because they're going to want you to wire money. Police agencies don't have you do that. Then you hang up, you'll call that person back and find out, and that person's going to say, no, I'm sitting right over here at my house. And that is frequent. We've had several victims fall prey to that. Another thing, as he mentioned, is identity theft, which is big, and it's in the headlines all the time. And in Delaware, it's the appropriation of another person's identifying information without consent and intending to commit a crime. And it's a felony. It's a Class D felony in Delaware. And your identifying information can be name, address, date of birth, your social security number, driver's license number, phone number, your financial services account numbers, was your checking, your savings, credit card numbers, your PIN numbers. And how can that happen? You try to be as secure as you can, but the records can be stolen from your home or from a business. We know there's a lot of data breaches all over because these fraudsters are just trying. That's the best way to get the most for your bang for your buck in there. They'll hack into your computer. You'll have you'll get emails and they'll say, click on this hyperlink that they have there because there's a problem with your account. Well, you click on there, you open it up, and then you feed them all your information. You never do that. You'll go back to your account. You'll go back to the bank. You'll go back to your credit card company, and you'll go log in with them the correct way. If there is a problem, you'll have a message on there. And then the skimming machines. You have them at the ATMs, the gas pumps, cash registers. They're difficult to avoid. Yes, they say pull on it. You can see if some of it is fake, if there's a problem with it. Best thing is to go to gas stations or stores that are well used. There's a lot of people around, and not just ones that are off to the side. And sometimes that's inevitable. We all have had cards compromised, and I'll go over a couple of things on what we can do to at least minimize that. But also, you have the fakers and pretexters on the phone. They're going to call up, say they're a different police department. They're the IRS. They're a family member. And also rummaging in the trash. You get credit card offers. You don't just throw it out with all your information on there. You shred that, you get rid of that. And through the mail, they can get your mail diversion. So you have to watch to see if you're not getting mail regularly. You're going to want to get up with the post office to see if something's happened. And then obviously the wallet and the purse. But with the purse, they're not going to take the whole purse. They'll get in there and take the wallet out. While you're not looking, they'll either keep the wallet, you're going because you think it's in there, or they'll take some of them cards out, be able to slip that back in when you put your chair behind you at a restaurant, and you wouldn't even know it, and then they're down at the mall using that before you even realize that your credit cards and your ID are gone. So you just have to be very careful with that. When they get the information, they're going to open up credit cards. They'll get a cell phone. They'll also get a cell phone mailed to you. They'll get it to or another address. They'll open up bank accounts with checks, and they'll get loans. You can get online loans. It seems very easy for up to $4,000. That must be the threshold where there's not much scrutiny with that, because we get a lot of complaints. You won't know about it until it's in default, and then you get a letter saying that you owe this much money. Like, that's not me. It happens. It happens quite a bit. That comes through my office. They'll rent a car, they won't return it, and they'll make a fake ID with your information on it. So there's ways that you can avoid that, where you're going to shred all your documents. Everyone should have a small shredder in the house. They're not that expensive. At a lot of different stores you can get one. And you get alerts on your bank accounts, just like we're talking about the phones. You go to all your credit card companies, you go to your banks, and you get alerts. You could do it online, have it on mine. You set a threshold amount, where if something's purchased over that alert amount that you have, you'll get a notice on your phone. I've been in line, I've been purchasing something, and I get that alert before it's approved at the cash register. So it's right there for you at your fingertips. Now, we better stop that? No, but then you could call that credit card company and say, there's just been a fraudulent charge on my account. They'll shut down that account. They'll stop that. You are using your due diligence to stop a problem from continuing. And then it's happened to me. And then the next day, you get a new card in the mail with a whole different number. And you carry a minimal amount of credit cards that you also need. Now, one thing you should be getting every year, even to check this, because you might not see this yet, you can get a free credit report every year. It's not your credit score, it's your credit report. And you go to the Federal Trade Commission.gov, to that website, which is very good with a lot of information, and you will find a site that'll take you to there. Now, I have bags back there that has all this information in it too, with our numbers, and I'm going through a lot of this quick, but all the information is in the bags from the Attorney General's office back there. So you'll get your credit report, and you'll review that, make sure everything there is yours. Now, what if you're the victim of identity theft? Well, you'll contact the credit bureaus, all three of them, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. You'll put a fraud alert on there, so nothing else can go in. Anytime anybody wants to try to open up an account, it'll go to them. They will let you know. You'll contact all the credit cards and any fraudulent accounts, and you'll tell them this is fraudulent. You'll get an affidavit. You'll fill it out, and you'll get that back to them to start shutting that down. And you'll file a police report, which is important. You need a copy of that police report, because a lot of times they will want that, and you'll also keep a copy of it. Once you do that, you still feel like you're having some problems, you're still having the issues with the collection agencies, or someone's still continually trying to use your information for other cards or in other areas, you're going to reach out to us at the Attorney General's office for the Identity Theft Passport application, which comes right through me. I'll get that. You'll fill that out. I'll get a copy of the police report. All the instructions are in there on what to send in. I'll give you a call. We'll talk about it, find out what's going on, and if it's approved, we give you a letter. It's a certificate with the state seal on it. It's from the Attorney General, and it states that you are the victim of identity theft. This will help you. You can send a copy of this to the creditors, which shows that you're doing everything you can, showing that you're the victim. What you'll also get is what's called an identity theft passport, which is why we've named it that. It's a laminated card. It has your picture, your DMV picture on there. States you've been victim of identity theft, and that's good for 3 years. 3 years before it expires. Going back to if somebody uses your identity and makes their own with your name, your information on there, they get a ticket. They're happy with the officer. Thank you, officer. I'll pay this tomorrow. They're gone. It never gets paid. It's turned into a warrant under your name. You get stopped. You'll be able to show this. These will help you. These aren't a 100% guarantee that it'll clear it up, but it's a big help in stopping a lot of that. Delaware was one of the first ones to start with the identity theft passport. We've had it since 2006. I know I went through quite a bit here with this, but please take the informational packets back there that I brought. It has a lot of this. It has our numbers. You could also get up with us. You get up with me. We can also come out and do presentations that are a lot more detailed and explain it a lot more to any groups that you have that you feel might want some of this information and quite a bit more of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. I think Alan touched on a number of different topics that we all, I'm sure, know someone who was a victim of fraud, or we know someone who may have actually participated in the fraud and got in trouble. The thing is, we have to make sure that we are not keeping these fraud occurrences to ourselves. We have to make sure that we reach out to the appropriate law enforcement agencies and bring it to their attention. Talk to our friends and family also so that they're aware and we can pass the word along to make sure that we try to limit the reach of these fraudsters as soon as possible, because they really do not discriminate as far as who they're attacking. I know for a fact they will come after our senior citizens, some of our most vulnerable people who are at home, and they prey upon you because they feel that you're an easy target. They prey upon young kids as well, college students. It's happened to my daughter. She went away on vacation, as you mentioned, about the rental agreements. They had a person who actually booked the vacation for them, who was an attorney. And she was the one who was a victim to the actual scam. And my daughter and her friends went to vacation. Thank God we knew someone in the area, and they were able to provide housing for them while they were on vacation. But if it can happen to my daughter, I'm sure it can happen to anyone. And again, there was an attorney who was actually involved with booking the reservations for them. So it's something that it can happen to anyone. We want to make sure that we're aware of the type of things to look for. I think having discussions like this, the panelists that we have here, definitely can bring attention to these type issues. Realize that we do not have a silver bullet. There's not going to be one answer that fits all situations. It's something that's constantly changing, and we have to be willing to change with it. We have to be willing to recognize that the fraudsters don't always look like, as I mentioned before, what we think they look like. They look like us. They can look like any one of us in this room. If you know someone, trust me, that it happened to, it can happen to you as well. I'd like to move on and ask a few more questions before we open it up to the public for the Q&A session. Kathy, what are the current fraud issues that the public should be aware of?
Some of the top ones are identity theft, which you just hit on. That's huge. Construction scams, the fraudulent credit cards, and I was up very early this morning and reading about the smishing. Everybody now is kind of using texting more so than the emails. A lot of emails get lost where a text comes right to you, and there's different, fraudsters that are scanning numbers, and just by you either responding, going, wrong person, now they know your number's active. So that's something that's very popular. Everybody's texting, our kids are texting us from one room to the other. But those are usually those seem to be the ones that are rising or to the top.
With the credit cards, we want to make sure that we're looking at our statements on a regular basis, because sometimes what happens is these fraudsters, they may steal your information and they may change the actual address where the shipments are being delivered. So you will never know that your cards have been compromised. So you want to definitely be diligent and check your statements. And as soon as you realize something doesn't look right, reach out to the credit card company and bring it to their attention. Mike, I'd like to find out from you, how can artificial intelligence help prevent fraud?
It's artificial intelligence and machine learning are sort of buzzwords in our culture today. And they have it can have a practical application in uncovering fraud and in a near real-time basis. Large companies and banks are beginning to implement systems that allow them to analyze transactions as they're being processed to determine the level of risk associated with a particular transaction. The follow-up then can be almost real-time. In today's traditional audit process, it's historical, and even a forensic engagement is historical. So you're coming in after it's happened and quantifying what has happened and trying to remedy the situation. Using artificial intelligence and or machine learning, we may be able to bring our response to the moment it occurs so that we have a better likelihood of catching the fraud and mitigating or minimizing the losses.
Does any of the other panelists have anything they would like to add to the artificial intelligence piece or how to prevent the fraud? Okay. Can move on. As far as local governments, some of us are aware of the city of Atlanta and the cybersecurity breach that they experienced, as well as which also included ransomware. This is open to our panelists. What are some of the things that a local government, a state government can do to help protect ourselves against something like that from occurring in our state?
That seems to be more in the IT area, to protect yourself. But you also have to educate your employees as to not open up certain suspicious emails. We get that throughout the state. Hey, here comes one. They're phishing, and they will send an email blast to try to get into your computers and your computer system. They do it through the state. And our IT people are pretty good, and they're on top of it and say, do not open this one. They've also sent out tests to test state employees to see how many will open that up. And it's gotten better to where there's less and less that'll do that. So you really have to educate your employees not to open up certain things that can allow ransomware to come in and take over everything.
I agree. Does anyone else have anything they would like to add?
Well, it's a culture. It's, the tone comes from the top, and I think that you want to give your employees the tools they need, but you also want them to know what their roles are, and internally who's got what permission to what information, and I think the internal controls are huge.
Internal controls definitely are huge. It's something where we want to make sure that the appropriate people have access to the information that they need. We have people who transition from one department to the next. We want to make sure that their level of access does not move on with them to the new role, because in that new role they may not need to have the access that they had in the old role. So you want to make sure that you're keeping abreast of that, and you're constantly making the appropriate changes and giving people access that they truly need, so that we don't have a segregation of duties issues that potentially exist that could become a much greater problem for us. As far as the phishing emails, as you mentioned, Alan, I know that's something that at one of my old companies we used to do as well. They used to send out phishing emails just so that everyone is aware that no one, again, can solve this problem by themselves. We all have to be aware of suspicious emails that come through, and we want to make sure that we're communicating to the appropriate people so that they can stop it in its tracks and communicate to the rest of the organization what to do. Because the fraudsters and their emails and their websites, they are very clever. They make it appear as if it's legitimate. They make it appear as if it's someone internal from the organization who normally will communicate with you. But there may be something that's off. And those are the type of things you want to be paying attention to. It can be the spelling. They can have different punctuation in there that you know the person who they're saying, claiming to represent doesn't really write that way. Or you know that they normally don't communicate to you. So before you click on it, think about it. The one thing we used to do is, with the phishing emails that we used to send, we will have the people who actually clicked on those emails participate in training. That's something that we may need to think about doing at more establishments. Constantly be in the training mindset, because the fraudsters are constantly changing what they do. The only way that we're going to stay ahead of the ball game is by changing what we do, because the things that we did yesterday or a year or 5 years ago may not work with the type of things that are coming down the pipe. So we definitely want to make sure that we keep our eyes and ears open and make sure that we're communicating with each other and reaching out to the appropriate organizations so that they're aware of the type of threats that are coming or currently exist. We have a few more minutes that we will have a discussion. If anyone would like to talk about anything that they feel as though we haven't already discussed that you feel as though will be beneficial to our audience or to the general public, feel free to have that time. And once you're finished, then we will open the question and answers up to the public. We have a mic set up for you to take a few minutes and ask questions. Okay? Does any of the panelists have anything in addition they would love to share with our audience?
No, just one thing you hit on earlier about passwords. Okay, you do need to keep them unique, and you need to keep them different. You can't have one password for several different sites that you're going to, obviously, because you'll be able to get into that very easy. But it is, you have to continually change them and not make them easy. Some sites will even show you a bar, how strong it is, but you really need to stay on top of that. And two-part where you're going to have to, you put in a password and then they're going to send a text, which is great. That's the best way you could secure a site right now, to way authorization of that. And so you need to really think about that on a lot of important sites.
There's something, I mean, a lot of you professionals, you're out there, you have a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, but you still might be working and still have employees and peers that maybe are doing something that isn't exactly according to standards or what it should be. And so you should have obviously training and manuals, and they should be updated, but you should also have an outlet to go to in the event something's just not right. I see a lot of women in the audience, and sorry men, but we do have a really good gut, and we have perceptions, and we have intuition. It's called women's intuition. Just kidding. No, really, you should be able to have that, and you could always go back to your workplace and go, do we have controls? Have we updated our manual in a few years? Are there opportunities to maybe get a little team or task force and take this on? But that's, the communication is key instead of operating independently. And if you don't feel comfortable telling your worker, hey, someone's doing something and that's not appropriate, you've got to at least know what is my chain and what is my outlet to do so, because a lot of people just won't talk about it. And then once something comes out, oh yeah, that makes sense now because she was doing it this way. So that's something I would be proactive. If there's opportunity for education, I always love, we all do continuing education. Maybe there's opportunity to do that in the workplace too, or suggest it.
Anyone else have anything they would like to offer? That concludes the panel discussion portion of our agenda. We would like to open it up to the public. If you have any questions, please feel free to walk up to the mic.
I can speak loud enough, I think. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
As we know, many people or many employees see potential fraud and they're reluctant to report it because
Please go to the microphone. Everyone cannot hear you. Thank you.
Are there people online?
Yes, we do have people online who are watching as well.
Oh, thank you.
I didn't realize that. As we know, many employees, there are many situations where employees see potential fraud, but they're afraid to report it because of fear of retaliation. Does anybody on the panel have any comments about what companies can do to encourage the reporting of potential fraud? And then another question in relation to that is, can somebody speak about the whistleblower protections in the state of Delaware?
I think encouraging, I mean, that kind of gets back to what I just mentioned or maybe touched on a little bit in the office place is people need to have their tools, they need to understand their roles and their permissions, but they also need to know the policies and procedures. And sometimes they need to be updated or looked at again, or maybe there's something new that's happening that, or someone else is doing. I like to look at what other states are doing instead of reinventing the wheel and look at best practices and go, wow, they do that. That's great. Or go on the internet and look what another agency's doing similar to wherever you may work in the country. And you know, we keep up to date with our continuing ed and peer review, and we find out what's working. But there's got to be a process to encourage it, to encourage and feel safe, which leads right into the whistleblower. A lot of times people will not complain because they're afraid. They don't know what's going to happen to their position, but we should have whistleblower protection here in Delaware. So there's got to be outlets, and your employees need to know what they are. So it goes back to communication. And a lot of times people will go into a job or change a position, and if they don't have the proper training, sometimes people just assume you know everything. We need to say, here is this manual, and let's go through it together. Do you have any questions? Sometimes people are comfortable talking about that in a group setting. Sometimes they're not going to raise their hand and ask. So there's got to be an opportunity, just an opportunity for the employees to know that they have somewhere to go and someone to talk to, whatever it may be.
I think one of the ways to ensure there's not an opportunity for retaliation is to be able to report anonymously.
Mm-hmm.
And using hotlines is a really important factor. I know the city has a fraud hotline. It's actually
State
right up
too.
there, and the state does too. And that's easy for a large organization to have a department that handles that. In a small organization, there are services, external third-party services that could provide such an anonymous way for an employee to report. And from what I've seen in practice, they're rather affordable. So, making sure that's well publicized within the organization and available to all employees would be a good way to head off retaliation, possibly.
That's definitely one of the things we do at the city. We encourage employees as well as citizens to utilize the fraud hotline, 1-877-217-4670. You can call anonymously. We also have a fraud hotline where you can email complaints as well, and we constantly are checking the lines to make sure that we're on top of what's going on. And if we're not able to handle it ourselves, we definitely make sure that we reach out to the appropriate parties so that we can definitely have it investigated and hopefully bring it to some type of resolution. So I encourage anyone to use the city's fraud hotline and also the fraud hotline as well as the email site to communicate whatever frauds they're aware of. Even if it's not a fraud, but you feel as though there could be something there, we will listen to that as well. So don't be discouraged. Anyone else? That was a good question. The key for us is definitely communicating, because if we do not communicate, the frauds will continue and they will grow. And as I mentioned before, the cost worldwide to fraud is $3.7 trillion.
Kathy and Mike, I know both of you are certified fraud examiners, and as a senior auditor, I've been with the city for about 5 years, so I'm looking to grow my experience education. Can you describe what value having a CFE has done for you in your professional aspirations?
There's a lot of training opportunities. There's networking online opportunities, and not just, from state to state. This is global. But I think that kind of support and bouncing ideas off each other, or listening to someone else and how they remedied a situation. But, they have a booklet as well that they can give out, or you can go online and you can find out where you could go to get certain training, awareness. I find it very valuable, great organization.
From a personal perspective, as a CPA doing forensic accounting, I had a lot of the tools I needed for the accounting piece of it. The CFE credential provided me with more of the hands-on training that I need to be able to build a case that ultimately will end up in court, and build the documentation that the prosecutors and or law enforcement will need to serve justice in a situation where there is fraud.
Good question, Yvette. Anyone else like to step up and ask any questions?
When we're talking about passwords, and changing the passwords and that type of thing, like currently I have about 75 to 100 passwords that are for different sites. How do you store them securely? And you think you put them on your computer, but then your computer can get hacked. What would be a suggestion to keep track of them? Because I can't keep track of all of them because they change every 3 months. That's just like an issue these days with the constant changing.
I just want you to know, I saw recently there's a bookstore that has an actual password keeper for you to put everything in that book, which I thought was interesting. It's scary too.
And
If
the,
you
well,
lose
the other
book.
thing is, do you write it down? Do you that's I feel like is such a hard issue.
Something though, if you had a base of the password, let's say there's a base word,
Right.
okay, and you're always going to capitalize 2 different parts of that. I wouldn't write it down personally, and I wouldn't save them on the computer as well. But I would suggest maybe doing variations where I'm putting exclamation, and if it's not on here, usually you get a couple chances. But are you using those sites all the time that you need? Oh, really? I would not suggest writing them down unless you had a very secure place to put them, maybe a safe or something.
I don't know if there was any kind of website or anything that.
Well, then, see, you always have that opportunity of
Right.
that getting hacked as well. And if you put them on your phone in contacts, like, okay, this is Amazon, and here is my login and password. If your phone is not kept up to date, and
Well, then you could lose your phone.
you're making sure you're
Right.
doing whatever you need to do to keep that secure,
Yeah.
then that turns into a whole nother issue.
Right.
Yeah, or another thing, don't keep them all together, all 75. Keep them split up, and I know it's even more to track. But and just like she keyed on, use different codes and only use part of that word that what the rest of it's going to be. I know, I'm with you. I have a lot too, and it's hard to keep track of these, and they always change. But you only write part of it, and you know what the rest is going to be. Or you're going to change this letter, which means this letter, and keep that constant so you understand what it is. There's no perfect answer for this,
Right.
because you have major banks and corporations that have data breaches all the time, so they can get in it. But your best thing is to continually change it and, just code it different on a lot of these
Yeah.
on a regular basis, and keep them separate.
Yeah. That's
Definitely keep them separate, and definitely realize that what works best for you may not work best for another person.
Right.
So it's up to the individual to find out what works best for them, and to realize that just because you made the change one day, you cannot assume that that's going to protect you all the time, because the fraudsters don't sleep. They're constantly changing what they do, and you may be fine one day, but the next day you may not. So just be aware that it's something you constantly want to be diligent of and change on a frequent basis. A lot of places may tell you every few months, but again, even with that, it's up to the individual to stay on top of it and just realize that the fraudsters are out there, and we want to try to always stay one step ahead. Okay?
I appreciate the fact that we're talking about external threats. I'm more concerned with internal threats. And if you got to elaborate on that. And also, we mentioned about training. I think that's a great exercise and showing signs. I know, like we just mentioned, we're just touching the tip of the iceberg here. And you just have to be street smart and just, hey, think twice before you actually say yes to anything. But, you know, with various concerns like something simple as password, my wife writes them all down. She posts them on the wall in her office. It's like she has a home office. And there's probably 99 other individuals percent of the individuals that do the same thing. They just don't admit it. So if we could talk more about internal threats, that's where you're going to excite me, and I could learn a little bit more about issues.
I can start it. From an internal threat perspective, we can have all the passwords we want, have them jotted down, have them memorized. If you get up from your laptop or your computer and you don't lock it down, it's all for naught. You walk away from your screen, anyone can walk up and log on as you. They have access to your information. So one thing you want to do is make sure that you Control-Alt-Delete every single time you get up and walk away from your desk. Even if you work in a secure environment where people are swiping in to get into your department, you want to make sure that you leave your laptop or your device, you lock it. Same with your smart devices, lock it. You don't want to have it where people can just walk up at any time, because you're an open book now. You're an open book. They have access to your confidential information. So to protect it, protect your information, lock it. Another thing that we like to do is make sure that if we have laptops, you want to make sure that you're not leaving them unattended at night. If you do leave it in your workplace, make sure it's in a locked environment. Your door is locked, your office door is locked, or you put it inside a cabinet and it's locked, because at the end of the day, we have people coming in, cleaning offices, doing different things. What's to prevent them from walking out with your device? Lock it up. Because unless your device is encrypted, it's easy for people to get your information. So those are two things that I would say. Make sure that you're constantly locking your devices when you leave them unattended, and put your devices in a locked cabinet, lock your office.
I don't know if anyone has children, but or siblings that are younger, but I've known of a parent and a child sharing an iTunes account, which is all the music, and next thing you know, the parents getting the friends' iTunes mixes because they shared it with their friend. So, there's a lot of it's education. You got to tell people as well around you what you're doing, but also make sure that the people you care about are doing, putting on as many controls as they can and what they should and shouldn't do. I know that sounds silly, but it's happening. It's happening all the time. It is. We have to be diligent. We have to be constantly looking over our back. It's different. It's different today. It's probably going to be a lot more strenuous in years to come, but there are, because of things that are constantly changing. Everybody's one step ahead of us with fraud, because there are a lot of folks, I guess, aren't working and have a lot of time on their hands to come up with these ideas and plans and schemes.
And we don't want you to just think that it's just going to be in the office setting, because some of the people may work in the warehouse. Their things they need to be concerned about are slightly different than the office setting. They may need to make sure that they have scissor gates up at the loading docks to make sure that people can't just walk up and just take merchandise. You may want to make sure you have cameras throughout the organization especially at your exits, making sure that people are propping doors open so that people from the outside can just walk in. Some people are doing things like that because they're too hot and they want to get some fresh air, so they put something in the door to prop it open and get a little air coming in. Well, you're actually putting your company at risk by doing that, because anyone can just walk in and have access to your facility. Making sure that you have people manning the front desk in the organization so that you can't just walk in and have free reign in your departments. Making sure that you're not leaving paper with confidential information on it out in the open. You have social security numbers on documents that haven't been redacted. You have credit card information on documents that hasn't been redacted. You want to make sure that even the employees who are receiving that information aren't leaving it out, aren't going on eBay shopping with information that was provided to them for a particular purpose. All of these things are needed. There's not a silver bullet. All of them combined are needed. And it's just a small step that we're taking to try to help raise awareness towards mitigating those type of issues from occurring.
So how are we taking all this knowledge with all the professionals here that get it and getting that out?
I think having discussions like this, because it's going out to a much broader audience. It's actually being recorded on and broadcast on WITN. You can actually see different videos that we have shown on WITN as well. Main thing is communicating. That's the biggest thing we can do, is communicate to make sure that we're not afraid to speak up if something happens to us or something happens to someone that we know. We have to be willing to take a leap of faith and step out and let people know we were vulnerable. We hope this doesn't happen to you, and these are some of the things that you may be able to do to prevent it from occurring. I think being silent is one of the worst things that we can do, because we're allowing the perpetrators to continue to commit their crimes. Anyone else?
Hi. I think Alan touched on this a bit, but recently we've seen a lot more phishing through text messaging. And I had a conversation with some parents where their children had received like phishing text messages and trying to start a conversation with their child, or it could just be even us, and then they want to get our credit card information or whatever. But, if it happens once, maybe don't think much of it. But if it continuously happens, what's the proper way to deal with that? And, just for the public and others, what would be the proper technique or who to reach out to?
That's a good point. I mean, this is where the scammers are continually evolving. Just like on the phones, there's robocalls, it could be robotexts, to where it's just going through different numbers and waiting for a response back. And then sometimes it'll go to a person. A lot of times on these calls, you'll have to say hello twice before it'll go to a person, because the computer will kick it that way. Could be the same thing with the texts. You could try to block them and to see how that's going to go, but it continually changes. So right now, like he said, there's no silver bullet to stop this. Best thing is educating your children and everybody else on this, on what not to answer. If you don't know it, don't answer it. It's just like a door at your house. Someone knocks in there, you're going to say, who is it? If you don't know who it is, you're not just going to let the person in. So yeah, you just have to be diligent and ignore it. A lot of times they'll move on until someone will finally respond.
As far as some of the places where we can actually report the fraud, can you mention? I know we have information in the bags, but for some people who may not look at the bags right away, what are some of the agencies that they should reach out to if they're aware of a fraud occurring?
The Federal Trade Commission is one. They want reports too on identity thefts. They keep stats on this, and it'll help them try to find out, what's the latest trend. Also, the FCC, Federal Trade Commission, with the phones, they're looking into the robocalls. They're doing the best they can, but even people high up in that organization have almost fell victim to some of that. So yes, the governmental agencies are looking into this. They're doing the best they can, but you got to remember, the criminals will or fraudsters or scamsters will always try to be one up on you. So once you figure out something, they're going to change that too. So yeah, report it to the FCC, report it to the FTC. Like I said, the Federal Trade Commission is a great website and a lot of information on there.
Anyone else?
To my first question about asking about these phone calls, because personally, I get like a lot of phone calls and it's coming from area codes that are identical to my cell phone number. So sometimes you might think like there's somebody actually trying to reach me, and then sometimes I'll call back and the person will say, "Oh, you called me on this number." And I'll be like, "I didn't call you," and then somebody will curse me out, but it happens like that. I wanted my follow-up question to that. I think he just answered it, that the FCC is trying to do something to keep on the robocalls and so forth. My next thing is, with my kids, I'm able to control their tablets. I see whatever they do on their tablets, no matter where they are, as long as it's connected to the internet. When they want to download anything, it comes to me for me to review it first before I approve it. And I use Google, there's this Google Family Link that I use. My daughter fights with me over it, but I still use it. My question is, how secure are some of these password keepers that you see online, or even on a smartphone? It says, you know, password save or password locker, all those things. How secure are they? Are they stuff that we can trust, you know, hold on to some of these things? That's my question.
I don't think anything is you can say with 100% certainty that it will never be breached. But they do have good levels of security for these type of apps or for these type of programs. And yeah, you do have to have it's great that you do this, the parental guides that and different levels that you put on for your kids. That's key and will help you from having a lot of problems. You know, you need to see what your kids are doing. And but there's nothing that's 100% right now. Like I said, once we come up with something, or one of these companies come up on here's the best that you have, they will still try to get that. So you just have to decide, you know, what's the best for you, and where do you feel the most secure, and with your research too into these companies, what do you think is the best fit for you?
I think there's even something that's happened more recently, is where you get a 302 number. And it's really not a 302 number. They just grabbed one, so you think, oh, okay, well, that says Milford. I'm going to take that. It might be someone I know, but it really isn't. So they're buying those or using those. So they're always one step ahead.
If you do use an online service to store documents or to store passwords, it's very important, though, to use two-factor authentication. That lowers the risk theoretically associated with them just hacking your password alone.
One last question for me. Liability. Where does the liability stand? I know with credit cards you're not really liable to make those payments. But if you could talk a little more about, you know, who's responsible for fraud.
Are you talking about responsibility in the workplace?
What do you, like a little more detail, what do you mean, who's responsible?
Well, we mentioned credit card.
Oh, for credit cards? Oh.
Well, if you do your due diligence, like happened to me, I'm home. I get a text alert because it was above the threshold. There was a purchase at Lowe's in Indianapolis, and I'm sitting here in Delaware, and I call them up right away. I say, that's not me. And they say, thank you very much. Take it off. I get the card the next day. I'm using my due diligence. I'm helping them. So is the responsibility on me? No. If I look and for the next 5, 6, 8 days, I see a bunch of charges that aren't me, and I finally wait and get up with them, you know, they might have a different outlook on it. So it depends on how you respond to some of these for the credit cards. You can't keep your PIN number next to your debit card because the banks will not reimburse you if and it's happened. A person had a debit card or stolen, Well, how'd they get your PIN number? Well, it was written on the back. Sorry, you're out of your money. You know, it's things like that that you really have to use your due diligence on, and, you know, a lot of common sense. So, but what other areas are you talking about?
I was under a different impression. I thought any kind of illegal transaction you're gonna have liable for. Credit card, you know, once you review your statement, you can negotiating if it's a legal transaction or not.
Most of it is. Like I said, you know, once you review your statement, if you review your statement once a month, sure, you're gonna see things, you'll be able to do it. But it depends on how long you're gonna continue to let that happen, then you're gonna go back to the bank and they're gonna say, you know, is this person part of this or is this person not? So you're gonna cause a bit more frustration for you in trying to resolve that problem, and instead of trying to stop it after the first incident.
I just feel like we have this big wall, this dam, we're just putting our fingers in this little hole, it's so flow. I appreciate the fact that they're bringing us more up to speed with what's going on, so much we don't know.
It's definitely overflowing. As I mentioned, $3.7 trillion annually is the cost of fraud worldwide. And when you look at that cost, we would have to spend $130 million every single day for the next 78 years to come close to $3.7 trillion. $130 million every single day for the next 38 years. It's massive, massive. We realize that discussions like this today, we are not going to be able to prevent every fraud that's going to occur. But if we can stop one, I think it's well worth it coming together. We can stop one. I think at the end of the day, these fraudsters are costing all of us a lot of money because the corporations are going to pass the cost down to us in the long run anyway. So in order for us to try to minimize that, I think we have to keep our eyes and ears open. We have to continue to communicate with each other. We can't be afraid to talk about if we were vulnerable and we were, you know, taken advantage of. We have to talk to people, let them know what's occurring so that we can try to prevent it from occurring to someone else. We have to definitely reach out to the panelists and our coworkers and find out from them what type of things are coming down the pipe. What type of things do you know of that we should be aware of so that we can get the proper training that we need to mitigate these things from occurring and hurting us personally, hurting our small businesses, hurting our corporations that we work for. It's all the above. All the above. Because we all know and have heard of the Bernie Madoffs, the WorldComs, the Enrons, Target being breached. I mean, it happens. We all shop at Target. So it can happen to us. It can be our information. Okay? I'd like to thank you all for coming out today because this was really something that was definitely needed for all of us, our city, our state. I cannot thank our panelists enough for coming out in this weather and agreeing to participate in our panel discussion. I cannot thank my team enough for putting the whole International Audit Week together and bringing this all together. I'd like to give you all a round of applause. And I hope as you leave the city today, you're extremely careful because the roads, I'm sure, are a little slick. So just be careful as you're leaving the premises and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.